What about second breakfast?
Time for second breakfast.
What's up, everybody? Monster from Breakdowns for Breakfast here with a new episode of Second Breakfast. If you're joining us today, hopefully you listened to our episode earlier this week all about Metallica's album Ride the Lightning. Now, as we mentioned on that episode, there's a lot of cool stories and behind-the-scenes stuff about that album that we just sort of glossed over and we didn't spend a whole lot of time on because we mostly just talked about the songs themselves, as we typically do. But because Metallica is a huge band and Ride the Lightning was a pretty important record, I thought it deserves, instead of just throwing out a couple of tidbits, it deserves a 10-minute deep dive into some stuff behind the scenes. Now, if you're a huge Metallica fan and you listened to that episode and you thought we didn't know what the hell we were talking about, that's fair. We're not the biggest Metallica fans in the world. My brother is. He probably should have hosted the episode with us. But that's neither here nor there. I am a pretty big Metallica fan. As you see, I'm wearing my one of my shirts. I have 5, I think. And this is the tour shirt from their Madly in Anger with the World tour, which was their tour for Saint Anger, which I did bring up a couple times on the Ride the Lightning episode. I'm not going to get into it, but I do think it's better than people give it credit for, but that's for another episode. Maybe I'll do a second breakfast by myself explaining the importance of Saint Anger, but that's not what we're here to do today. So what I want to do was just go through a little bit more information about the writing and recording of Ride the Lightning, because another thing, some of these second breakfasts, I'll go into like a band history and kind of do a deep dive. That's a whole other podcast. Like, that's not just like a spin-off thing. That's hours and hours worth of content. So I can't do that. Smarter people have made livings off of following Metallica. So I'm not going to try to do that. So here you go. Here's just 10-15 minutes about Ride the Lightning. Some of this you probably already knew. Some of it you might not. So, hey, hope you enjoy the ride. So, Ride the Lightning was released July 27th, 1984. And at the time, they were on this independent record label called Megaforce Records. They recorded the album in 3 weeks, and they used this producer by the name of Flemming Rasmussen. Now, the reason he sounds that way is his name is because they recorded this album at Sweet Silence Studios in Copenhagen, Denmark. Now, the reason they picked this producer and this studio, partially because Lars is from Denmark and he knew people there, but they specifically sought Rasmussen because he produced Ritchie Blackmore's album, or Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow, or just Rainbow, whatever you want to call it. And they really liked it. Now, longtime fans of the show, if you're paying attention, Ritchie Blackmore and the band Rainbow should ring a bell. Because that was the band that Ronnie James Dio sang for. So, cool little throwback there. So, before the band started recording Ride the Lightning, the band sat down with Rasmussen and they listened to Kill 'Em All a few times. A couple reasons they did this. Number one, Rasmussen was not super familiar with Metallica's music. He knew who they were, and I think he might have heard a little bit in passing, but this was a good way for him to get a feel of what they were, where they came from. Another reason they did this is because shortly before the recording of this album, Metallica had their gear stolen. One of the pieces of gear that was in that trailer was an amp that James Hetfield had been using, which was like a modified Marshall. Now, these Metallica were kids at this point, and James didn't really know what the mod was. He didn't really know what year his amp was. It was just an amp he'd had for a really long time that he loved the sound of. So they were listening to Kill 'Em All to try to find that guitar tone. So they had Rasmussen called a lot of people that he knew to bring in their Marshall amps. They tried a bunch of different heads, a bunch of different cabs to try to get the sound. And I think the guitar tone on Ride the Lightning for 1984 sounds really good. It's not the same guitar tone as Kill 'Em All, but two very different records. So, the way the bulk of the album was written was James and Lars would jam together and basically come up with riffs and different ideas. They called these the riff tape. And so what they would do is Hetfield and Ulrich would go back and listen through the riff tape and be like, oh yeah, that part's really cool. And then they would, organically work on stuff from that, basic structure there. A lot of critics at the time felt like Ride the Lightning was a huge step up from Kill 'Em All, and a big reason was based on the songwriting. Now, we brought this up in the episode, but Kill 'Em All is a punky thrash metal album. I mean, there's that's all it is. It's good. It's a step above a lot of their peers at the time, but it's still just a thrash metal album. So, with Ride the Lightning, while still firmly rooted in thrash metal, the songs had a lot more dynamics. And a lot of this was contributed to Cliff Burton because he introduced the band to music theory and, presented that to James, and that kind of changed the way James was writing songs. And apparently Cliff Burton was their second bass player, if you want to get technical about it. So, yeah, sorry for getting that wrong. So, I mentioned this in the episode, but in case you missed it, the beginning bell sound from For Whom the Bell Tolls was not actually a bell. They found this big-ass anvil, and they got a metal hammer, and Lars just smacked the anvil with the metal hammer, and they liked the sound of it. There's some debate on whether or not they pitched it down or slowed it down to make it sound more ominous, but it's not a bell, it's an anvil. The song The Call of Cthulhu, which we did discuss that too, being a horror fan, an H.P. Lovecraft, I'm not going to say fan, I've read a few of his stories. Cthulhu is definitely not spelled Cthulhu, but anyway, The Call of Cthulhu was originally called When Hell Freezes Over, which, not real sure why they changed the name. My first thought was maybe because Trapped Under Ice and then Hell Freezes Over. Maybe they didn't want two cold references there. I don't know. This also came up, and we mentioned one, but I don't think we ever mentioned the second one. But Ride the Lightning was the last album to receive writing credits from Dave Mustaine. Now, we didn't get into this, and God knows, again, all this is out there. You go find it. More intelligent people talking about it than me. But for anybody that's been living under a rock for 40 years, Dave Mustaine was in Metallica before Kirk Hammett showed up. So, according to Dave, he helped write a ton of Metallica songs that Metallica would eventually go on to use. I don't know. It stopped at Ride the Lightning as far as getting credit on the songs. But the two songs he receives writing credits for are Ride the Lightning and on Call of Cthulhu. Now, this was really cool, and I did not know this. Maybe bigger Metallica fans than I will know this. But during the recording of Ride the Lightning, James actually wasn't sure that he wanted to be the lead vocalist of Metallica. So they reached out to another guy and asked if he would be interested. This guy is a guy by the name of John Bush, and he was the lead singer of a band called Armored Saint. Now, in hindsight, I think Metallica made the right choice. John Bush, on the other hand, might have made the worst decision of his life. Then again, without James's vocals and his lyrics, would Metallica be Metallica? Who knows? But yeah, so I never knew that, which, me and Danger did mention on the show that while James's voice was good in a lot of places on Ride the Lightning, it didn't have the gravitas that he's kind of known for now. So it's interesting that even at that time, James was sort of like, I don't know. So I mentioned this a few minutes ago, and then we talked about it briefly on the show. But the song Fade to Black is actually about dealing with depression. James said a huge part of the lyrics stem from when all their equipment got stolen. This includes that amp that was, not only did he love the sound, but I believe he had that, it was like his first amp, and it had a lot of sentimental value to him as well. And that happened only 3 weeks before the recording of the album. So they had to use some borrowed gear. I think they were on tour with Anthrax at the time and had to use some of their gear, and then used a lot of studio gear for the actual recording of the album. As I mentioned before, they recorded the album in Copenhagen, Denmark, because it was cheaper to record there than it would be in America. But they were super, super broke. Some of the interviews I saw, they were talking about they slept there at the studio. Lars usually had somewhere he could stay because he's from that area. So he had friends and family he could, pop in and stay with. But they were sleeping in storage closets. They were resorting to eating only one meal a day so they could, afford more food and everything. Doesn't sound great. We also mentioned that they recorded mostly at night because you got a little extra time by recording the night shift. It was a little longer shift. So they were doing the best they could, It's just so funny to think about that now, knowing what Metallica becomes, knowing that this was how it started. And I mean, that's pretty neat to me. I also mentioned this. Everybody knows Monster, big horror fan, loves Stephen King. The name Ride the Lightning actually came from a Stephen King novel, The Stand, which is, I've actually read that one. A lot of people consider it one of his best. It's not one of my favorites. It's a little long-winded. I do have the uncut version, which is longer. But basically, Kirk Hammett was reading the book and saw the line Ride the Lightning, talking about a person going to the electric chair, showed it to the band, and they were like, yeah, that sounds cool. Let's go for it. I mentioned this on the episode as well. They had originally wrote 7 songs for Ride the Lightning, but the label said they needed one more, so they just slapped another song on there, and that song was Escape. Now, what's funny about this is they've never played Escape live, except one time. It was at a festival. Oh, shoot, I wrote it down. Darn it. It's the Music and More Festival, where in 2012, where they played Ride the Lightning from start to finish. That's the only time they ever played it. And that's because they don't like that song. The opening riff on For Whom the Bell Tolls is played on bass. I think most people know that now, but it's very fuzzy and distorted. So I think when they first released the album, some people thought it was guitar, just Cliff Burton being spectacular. Something that's also, I mentioned they were kids, sort of. Everybody in the band was between 20 and 22 while recording this album. And if you think about that blows my mind. I mean, it really does. Kill 'Em All, they sound like young, angry kids just playing as fast as they can. But being this young for Ride the Lightning and only being a couple years older for Master of Puppets, just mind-boggling. So that intro to Fight Fire with the classical guitar was actually something that Cliff Burton had been playing on acoustic guitar and during the tour for Kill 'Em All, and they liked it so much that they sort of worked on it and made it the intro to the album. So according to an interview with Flemming Rasmussen, which I forgot to mention, he produced Ride the Lightning, but he also produced Master of Puppets and Justice for All, so he was there for those. They mostly worked in the evenings, slept during the day, and on one occasion, they had to stop recording, and he told Kirk Hammett, dude, you stink, go take a shower, we cannot go on because you're nasty. And that was, that was just kind of the stuff they had to deal with, So he also goes on to tell this story, and he didn't remember the exact song, but I think he was referring to Creeping Death. He said that during the chanting part, it sounded like it didn't sound good. Something was missing. And so he had a theory that Cliff Burton wasn't really singing. He was just in the booth mouthing the words because I don't know. He just didn't feel like singing it. So he paused and kind of took the rest of the guys aside, and basically said, okay, we're going to do it again. But this time, don't sing. Just whenever you're supposed to come in, don't sing and see what happens. And sure enough, when they went back into to record that part, whenever the vocals were supposed to start, nobody started, and Cliff was just in there like mouthing the words without making a sound. And they were like, damn it, Cliff, So they had this mantra in the studio, no reverb. They didn't want to like add any digital effects, so they used sort of a natural echo. And the best example of this is the way Lars's drums were recorded. They basically set him up in a like big warehouse that gives it this like big echoey boomy sound. And I also mentioned this while we were recording, that they were sort of giving Lars drum lessons while recording the album. Rasmussen had a lot of nice things to say about Lars and his playing, but he said Lars often played off of, emotion and was often thinking of like fills and not thinking of just keeping a steady rhythm. So they really worked with him to, explain to him the 2s and 4s and 1s and 3s and try to get him to steady, and focus. And like I said on the episode, I had a lot of nice things to say about Lars. There's one or two spots that I think are a little sloppy. And I know that, there's a million memes about it. And, they're older guys now, man. Trying to play some of these old songs cannot be easy on your knees and stuff. So I think Lars is a really talented drummer. I think everybody in this band is talented. So one last thing that I thought was really interesting, and I'll leave you with this. So James Hetfield claims that Ride the Lightning is actually his favorite Metallica album because it was the first where they got to have a say in their production and sound. However, he also said Escape is his least favorite Metallica song, like I said on the episode, because it was basically written to be a radio-friendly song that the label forced them to put out. They only performed it that one time in 2012 at the Orion Music and More Festival, and they only did it because they were playing Ride the Lightning from start to finish. I thought it was really interesting that on an 8-track album, one of the songs is your least favorite song, but that album means so much to you that that's still considered your favorite album that you've ever made. So I thought that was really cool. And so that was part of the reason that I scored it the way I scored it. Is it my favorite Metallica album? No. And I struggled with what my favorite Metallica album actually is. I'm not ready to say. I feel like there's 3 or 4 that I can kind of put up there, but I also have not really given a deep dive into some of their most recent albums. I know I listened to 72 Seasons once or twice, but I remember I really, really liked it, but that's kind of why I scored Ride the Lightning the way I did, because I don't think it's the best Metallica album. It's not my favorite Metallica album, but damn is it good. And if they hadn't done what they did on that album, I don't know that Metallica would be the Metallica we know now. So I find it to be a very important record, not just for Metallica, but for heavy metal in general. So thank you guys for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed our episode. I hope obviously Danger's not a big Metallica fan. I'm more of a Metallica fan, but they're not my favorite band either. So, we were being very honest. And so I hope you enjoyed it. Brian, I love you, man, and I hope we did your boys some justice here. Obviously, I think your score would be even higher than mine, but I hope you also dug just the conversation and everything. So, yeah, everybody, thanks for tuning in, and hope you have a great day.